Yeah. My name is Enrique Ramírez. I live in the UK. I'm currently working for TransferWise. You can find me on Twitter. Looking for Hikem. I'm not very active on Twitter, but if you want, you can look for me online. So yeah, first of all, I want to explain a situation with the emoji language. I don't know if you guys speak the emoji language. You're familiarized with it? So I don't know. What does this tell to you? Did you get it, or I'm going to explain it anyway? So the situation that I encounter, or I have encountered in the past, and I still do, is you open your Android Studio, you check out your project, it does the indexing, it does all those things that Android Studio does. Then you click on the play button, right? Then the fans start making a little bit of funny noise, right? Like they start looking like it's a plane that is going to start taking off, right? And it gets especially hot, right? Up to a point where you could even fry an egg on it. And it takes some time. It depends on the project. Maybe you have a lot of annotations on your project. You have legacy code with I don't know how many million lines of code, but it takes some time. I think it's a situation people relate to, right? I also did the Spanish version of it because why not? We are on DroidCon Madrid with the paella and the siesta, of course. So what's the solution? So you just go and get a more expensive laptop, right? You go to the IT department and say, give me a new laptop. Give me like the most expensive top spec one. That's like almost everyone can do that, right? Well, oh, sorry, not quite. You go there and say, oh no, we just bought these laptops. They need to last at least 3 years. You need to stick with whatever you have. So I propose an alternative solution. I advocate for this solution, but this doesn't mean that you can always use other. This is completely compatible with other things like modularizing your app or having reducing your annotations on your project and trying to optimize the project is what I'm trying to say. That's completely compatible with that, but this is just an alternative solution that could help you or might not. It depends on your situation. But yeah, I'm gonna explain it first. The concept is quite simple. You have a machine and a remote machine. You send the code. You synchronize the code with that remote machine. It compiles, and then you get the build files back. Well, that's it. Well, that's the end of the talk. Not quite. So let's talk about the requirements for doing this. So you need a remote machine, right? With Linux, I recommend no graphical user interface, just not to waste some computer cycles on things that you don't need, like having a desktop or having a graphical server in your server. You need an SSH server. I don't know. I guess everyone knows what SSH is. Does anyone doesn't know what SSH is? No, everyone knows. You need Java, obviously, same thing that you will have on your local machine, and you need the Android SDK, obviously. On the client side, you need a laptop, a machine that runs either Linux, Mac OS, or Windows, and the software where we do all this thing is SSH. You need an SSH client, and on the top of that we have rsync. That is some software, is some piece of software that allows you to, using SSH allows you to sync to directories. It can do it on locally, but the cool thing is that using SSH, it does it between two remote machines, where you can pass some parameters, and I think it's quite cool. It's actually, those two things are kind of old thing. I don't know if you heard about them, rsync I'm not going to say from the 80s, but well, SSH I think is quite old, but both those tools are like they have been there for ages. So, and that works on Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. Not quite. We'll talk about what it works on Windows, but we'll talk about how to fine-tune that a little bit, so we can make it. We can use that on Windows. So the first approach. The first time I started trying to do this is one day that I was working from home, like 3 or 4 years ago. I had like the small, like the lower spec MacBook, like the thin one, 13 inches, that was quite slow. And yeah, I was. It was doing what I explained on the emoji, but up to a point where you couldn't do anything. And I thought, I'm going to try to use my wife's computer because she has a desktop machine. I installed this Linux. I'm going to try to do this. And maybe it is faster and the battery lasts longer. Or so I tried to do that, like manually, doing rsync into that machine, then connecting the phone using the device using ADB. I tried actually over the net, but that had some problems when the APK was a bit too big. And yeah, that was my approach. That was so the things that I was doing there. So you're gonna see some slides like this later, where I put the things in like the formula in with some variable things in angle brackets. That's what I couldn't find. And then I saw below like an example, just to be, so it is a little bit more tangible and you can relate more. Sometimes the angle brackets are a bit diffusing, a bit difficult to understand. So the first thing, as I said, are syncing the whole project workspace into the remote machine that I had at home. And on all the screen, I had I SSH it into that machine. On that same screen, I did Gradle and the task that I was using, assemble debug, for instance, installing on the device and running on the device. One thing I had to say about this, oh yeah, so while I was changing the code, I had to call the first command all the time, right? That was my first, how I did it at first. I think for a first approach was good. I didn't know about this, that is the Mainframer script. That is the script that is on GitHub. You're going to see the links later in the links at the last slide, and I will share the slides at some point. And this script, what allows you to do is, it does similar thing to what I did. You pass, you call the script, you pass a command. It's completely agnostic. It doesn't matter if it's Gradle or any other thing. So it syncs using rsync, it syncs the workspace, your workspace, runs the command that you have passed, and syncs things back. And then in this case, you run it from your laptop back. So what you get back is the APK and all the build files. And yeah, that's a very simple concept. How does it work is what I say. You call the script and the command line that you want. I say Gradle there, but you could have whatever. Well, whatever. Well, when I say whatever, is I haven't tried myself, but you could even have it on those cylindric. You could have a server with those cylindric, fancy Apple computers and try to do this for iOS. I don't know. Maybe you could try that. An idea. If you do iOS. So then you get it back after it runs, it finished. You install it, like you will do it, and same thing. So as you can see, with this script, it's still command line, right? So we need to write some stuff, but it's a bit better than the first approach. It was a bit too much, having to have two screens, having to every time you were changing something, having to sync everything. Yeah, it is an improvement, right? How it works. I did a little video of recording of my terminal. It's basically what I say it again, but let's have a look. Yeah, it's really slow typing, and I hope this is not too slow. But basically, it synced. Maybe you didn't see. It took a few seconds because you are only syncing the source, not the builds, not the whole workspace, all the source. We'll talk about that later, and then you got the result, and then you're running and building. So there's this third approach. I'm not saying that this is better than the other one, but the first approach is not very good. But the ones I advocate for the Mainframer one and the Mirakle plugin. You could choose between the two, but both has advantages and disadvantages depending on your situation. But this is more for Android, for Java, Gradle, JVM-based projects, or Gradle-based projects. So this is a Gradle plugin that you can have in either in your project, I believe, or globally for whole Gradle. We're going to see how to configure that later. That basically does the same, and you run the app on that device. The difference is when you configure this, you just need to run a Gradle command, which leads to how do you run this later. So you see that green button over there, you click it, that's it. Once you configure it, it's that simple. It's that simple. You can still write terminal, but if you like to use, you would like to use Android Studio directly instead, you can do it. So yeah, those are the two main approaches that I wanted to talk about. And let's see how we configure it. I tried to be not very boring. I know this is configuration, but I'm gonna try to be brief and you don't go to sleep. So on the server side, I'm not gonna go through it to how to install a Linux on a computer because it will take me forever, and there are 100 million tutorials online, right? So, but that's one thing that you have to do. You choose a distribution and you install it on your remote machine. Personally, I use Debian. I always use Debian in my life, like the only thing now. But yeah, that's my go-to distribution when I do my stuff. Even in the Raspberry Pi, I have Raspbian, that is Debian-based one. You need to install Java. I recommend doing the Oracle one with Java because I had some problems in the past where things were not compiling well, but I think OpenJDK works as well. But in my case, I normally use Oracle Java. You need to install the Android SDKs, accept licenses, install packages, all that kind of thing. You need to make sure that you have SSH installed, and normally that comes with the distribution. Some other times it doesn't come with it, but you need to check that. And for each developer, you will have to add a user for each developer that is going to be using this. Later, we are going to see that there's some tricks around this. And the last thing that you need to do is adding this to the etc environment. I'm not 100% sure if that's only for Debian-based, but that's like having the local .properties. The local .properties in your local machine has the path to the SDK. Well, it's different from the one that you have on your remote machine, obviously. But that's kind of similar thing that you will do if you were installing a CI server, right? Like Jenkins or something like that. Very, very similar. So kind of everyone was expecting something like this. On the client side, you need to generate the RSA key. Sorry. You need to copy that key into the remote server. You need to create the SSH config file and check that you can, after you do that, check that you can SSH into that machine without using without using any password. So yeah, that's basically what I described, but in different steps. SSH keygen for generating the RSA key, SSH copy ID to pass that key into the remote server, vim config to know people here hate it, kind of. Vim is kind of like technical death metal, right? Some is objectively good genre of music, but not everyone's cup of tea. You need to use the SSH add command the first time for the SSH daemon in your machine, I believe, and then see that you can, what I say that you can check that you can log in without having to use any password. That's the config file that you need to create, the one that I explained there. So yeah, this is just an example. In this one, I didn't put any curly brackets, but basically the name of the host, however you want to name it, you can call. I call it Mainframer, but you can call it the Terminator, whatever. Actually, name my machines after a Terminator. I'm on Terminator 3 at the moment. Yeah, your user, the IP address. This, I'm going to talk about a trick about dealing with that, because you might reboot that machine and then get a new IP address, but there are tricks around that. And yeah, all the other things like the common configuration. Yeah. So yeah, on the client side, to configure Mainframer, but to configure specifically Mainframer, what you have to do is download the Mainframer script. I'm gonna show it later. What it is on GitHub, but I'm gonna show it where exactly. You need to put it in your project on version 3 of it. They are on version 2, the script you're gonna download, but on version 3, the one that the new one they are doing, that they rewrote on Rust. But I tried and I didn't make it work. On that version, you don't need to put it in any specific project. It's like installing a command visible for everyone. But in this one, you need to have it specifically in the project, in the workspace. And you need to create the GNOME files. Why is this? Because when you are syncing from local to remote, you only want to sync the source code, right? Source codes, assets, and that kind of thing. But you don't want to sync any builds when syncing from local to remote. When syncing from remote to local, you want to do the opposite. You don't care about the source because you are the one generating it on your local machine, so you only want the build files. And the other thing that you need is optional, the aliases on Mainframer. Aliases, I'll talk about that. So that's the URL. You use wget. If you don't have a wget, you download from the web, or use Homebrew to install wget. That's the configuration. Quite easy. The remote machine, the name that you gave on that SSH config file. If it's Mainframer. If it's Terminator. The GNOME files are it's the same format at Git GNOME that everyone is familiar with. Yeah, the typical kind of things like the IDEA files, the IML files, the DSS store, local properties, obviously, because it's different from the one that you have on your local machine. And then on the local GNOME, you from local to remote is the local GNOME. You ignore the build files, all the builds and subfolder and everything, and on the way back you ignore the source files. You might need to fine-tune that, but this is basically it. Aliases. Does anyone know what they are, or doesn't know what they are? So they are basically shortcuts. Not instead of having to write this super massive command line thing, you just write a shortcut for that. So yeah, that's basically. So I have some common ones that but you will end up creating your own ones depending on how is your project, right? Or your projects. So I have one that is Mainframer test, but MF test, but you might call it MF unit test, or for static analysis you might have lint or whatever you have. You will name them based on what makes sense to you. Cool. What else? So yeah, to configure them, we'll talk about some other aliases later, but going back to configuring now Mirakle, the only thing that you need is this file on that directory. That where you need to keep in mind that the name of the host is the one that you keep and you put in on that config file, on the SSH config file that we saw at the beginning. Things to say around here. Yes. So if you already have Mainframer installed or configured on your project, Mirakle is going to search for those ignored files. If not, you need to add it to the root project. It is on the GitHub project. You can check how to configure it more in depth. You can do things like SSH compression, I think, as well. Yeah, the compression that it uses to do the syncing as well. A few things that you can tweak, fine-tune, whatever makes more sense to you and works better for your project. And another thing that I wanted to say is, once you have that there in that directory, any Gradle command that you write is going to try to sync with the remote machine, which we need to. There's a trick for enabling and disabling that. And yeah, the Windows problem. If you remember before, I had like an asterisk when I talk about the requirements for making this work with Windows, and yeah, there's solution. The problem with Windows, well, first let's describe the problem. It's like nowadays there's an SSH implementation that they added 2 years ago, I don't know. But you don't have rsync, for instance. You need a third party. You rely on a third party for that. So I mean, what's the solution I propose for the Windows problem? So you get a MacBook, and that's it. No, that's a joke. I of course don't advocate for that. It was just a joke, but it is a solution. Technically, it is a solution, but it's not the one I wanted to talk about. So these two, minimalistic, I think, GNU for Windows, I think, is that software suite, and SigWin, both are very similar things. They provide Linux commands to Windows, and they've been there for ages, I think. I personally haven't used GW for this, but I've used SigWin, and one of the problems I was having was like that the syncing of the build files and the APK, and when this does two things, right? It syncs the source, builds, and syncs back. On the syncing back, on the coming back, it was taking forever, because the way this rsync works is you compare two directories. Let me drink a bit of water. You compare two directories, and when you need, when the program decides it needs to sync them to send from one computer to the other, you don't block the rest. So in parallel, you start making like different threads. On this implementation, that wasn't working very well. So trying this on Windows with this was taking a bit too much and kind of defeated the purpose of having a remote machine building your things. So that's not a good solution, but still could use it for things like running tests. But like you run your tests, you keep coding your local machine, you could use that thing. Then Docker is another solution, because you can have a Linux on your machine. I haven't tried that either, but it's a solution. And then the other one is WSL, that is Windows Subsystem for Linux. I tried that one, and I think it's the best option, because it's not like installing a virtual machine on the top of your machine is using putting a layer of compatibility to emulate the kernel. I'm not sure, I'm not a Linux expert, but it's that kind of thing. So you can install distributions into Windows, which I find it quite cool. I personally love Linux, but that's I think the best solution for if you want to use this Mainframer using Windows. And it's quite simple to configure. You just need to write that on a PowerShell, and then you go to the Play Store, the Windows Store thing, however it's called, and you can choose the one that you want. You have a few options. It's not, you only have those, maybe you are using a super weird one and it is not there, but I'm pretty sure there are ways to install all this. I'm not sure. But that's how easy it is in Windows. Okay, so that's kind of it, but I'm gonna talk about some useful tricks that you can do, because there are some issues and this helps a bit. So I don't know if you remember when I talked on the config file that you need to type the IP address of that machine, but what happens if you reboot that machine and get a different IP address? It depends on how it is your network and all of that, but that can happen. So one of the ways of doing that is with MDNS, DNSSD. Those are different, and they are not the same thing. I think Bonjour is an implementation, MDNS is the protocol name, but you'll find those things when you look for that online, normally in the same pages. Yeah, so you use this to assign a name. Instead of having a DNS server, you have like a distributed DNS server, I think. You can call it that way. And instead of having to write an IP address, you use the name that you want to give to that machine, that local. That's a lot of people use this for other things, like discovering printers, I think. For if you on a Raspberry Pi, you can, when you install it and put it directly with, you can find it by default by just doing that. And the server that you use for that is what I recommend is easy. It is on the Debian distribution, for instance. It's Avahi, very easy to install, and out of the box just works with the name of the host machine. The only problem with this is if you are using VPNs or you are having some kind of weird network configuration like VLANs and that kind of thing, this might not work because it's not visible. This only works on local networks. Okay, so Aliases extended a little bit. So you remember that thing when I was explaining Mirakle. I was explaining Mirakle before, and I said that once you configure that, when you put that config file into the directory, any Gradle command that you type, it's gonna try to sync, and it's not the ideal, because sometimes you are on the train, sometimes you are at home, you don't have access to those machines. So you want to disable that. Having to go there and manually deleting the file and putting them back is a bit of a pain. So that's one of the aliases. There's another thing that you can do is passing an argument, but you cannot do that on clicking on the play button on Android Studio. So what you can do is having an alias to rename that file. Whenever you rename that file to, let's say, add conf at the end, it will stop working. So that's a good way. I'm going to share those on gists because the quotation marks are wrong when I paste it into the slides. I don't know. I copy from command line to here and then back, and it wasn't working. So the quotation marks are. So I will add it to the links when I share the slides. And then another alias that I think it could be quite useful is whenever you sync the you use Mainframer, you sync the source, then you build, and then it needs to sync a lot of files. It's not just the APK, it's a lot. And it takes forever, not because of those files being very big, it's because there are lots of them. So one of the tricks I came up with to speed even things up a bit more was you modify that ignore file that we were talking before, so you only get APKs. Well, I created Aliases for that. You do that, you sync, you build, you sync back only the APK, then you restore the ignore file, and then sync the rest so your Android Studio doesn't break and start seeing like everything red and it's a bit ugly. It's a bit of a hack, but it kind of worked for me. It's on version 3 of Mainframer there, as syncing, it will sync while it builds. So it's an improvement. It is not out there yet, I believe. Other trick, I'm gonna go very fast on this one. Dynamic user creation. If you remember, I talked about at the beginning of having to create a user every time a new developer joins the company. You can do something like this if your company uses LDAP or Active Directory. So you have dynamic users. I needed to follow a tutorial for that because I'm not an expert on that, but it's quite cool that someone joins and out of the box everything works for them. But in order to do that for new joiners, one thing that you can do is also having a script, a bash script where you ask a few parameters. What's your username, like the username they have in the company. Username, password, it will create and generate all those config files, and yeah, and I think it's good because it helps onboarding new people, avoids some time having to learn that you are going to do once, like all of this that I explained, you need to do once, and kind of a bit, could be a bit not the ideal. And less troubleshooting needed, because if you have a script that does it for you, kind of, if it doesn't work when the new dev tried it, it's because the script had some kind of problem. Then another trick, SSH tunneling, something that you might want to use if you have a remote machine that is not accessible, but other that is. So from the one that is not accessible, you can create a tunnel. And then from that, you can jump into that. That's one of the cool things of SSH that allows you to jump from, if one machine is visible but the other are not, but they are on the same network, you can jump from machine to machine. That's a super cool thing. Yes, let's talk real quick about advantages and disadvantages because I'm running out of time. Some of the advantages are what we saw on those emojis at the beginning. It doesn't get super hot, and even if you are using without battery, the battery lasts longer. Sometimes also you find that the IDE becomes unresponsive. Using this kind of thing make it lighter. The heavy lifting is done remotely, so your machine is more responsive, right? Even if you don't want it to use it for the normal building of things, you could use it for running the tests in parallel and your static analysis. You can keep coding, building in your local machine, but running those tasks. Maybe if your unit tests take like 5 minutes, you could do that kind of thing. Some disadvantages are you depend a lot on the network. If the network is slow, you can still, I still say that you can use it for things like running tests and things like that. The things that you don't want, you want to run before going to CI, so CI doesn't keep breaking. You could do it locally, and even if it's slow, you could do that because you don't need the APK back. But again, that also depends on how big the thing that you want to sync back, how big it is. If you have 100 meg APK and your network is quite bad, maybe this is not the best solution, but anyway. It needs configuration for every new developer, but there's also all the tricks that I show you that you can deal with those. Then one problem is sometimes you change branches, and if there are fundamental differences on those branches, like modules change or whatever, it breaks everything. So you need to log in and into that machine, delete the remote workspace, and then start again with the syncing. No configuring, just the syncing. It will, but that's super fast. And it requires a bit of maintenance, like having CI, right? You need to new API on Android. You need to install it, accept licenses. That kind of maintenance is not. And this has some of the links. One I really recommend. Mirakle on styling Android. I don't know if you guys know the guy, amazing guy that has been writing this post for, I don't know, 10 years. Then the Bala, that is the person who introduced me to this. He wrote a first post on Medium about how to do this, but with Docker images, which I think is a good approach. After that, we try with like real physical machines. A good article and an amazing developer. Then the link for the Mainframer repo and the link for the Mirakle repo. That thing that I talked before that I kind of half understand, this the dynamic user creation thing that I actually followed up, but to make it work, and I made it work. And the SSH tunneling that maybe not everyone uses it. And that's about it. And yes, it is Comic Sans, and I'm not gonna apologize for that. So, so any questions? I'm gonna try to answer them.
You always talk about sync your source files and get back the APK and execute it. But can you debug the application?
You can debug the application, but to debug the application, you need to use something like Mirakle. In the case of Mainframer, you will have to add extra command line thing there that I didn't talk about. That you can do. You can do ADB, start with debug something, and then I think you can, right? But you will need to do extra thing. But the Mirakle one is quite cool, because even if you are on the test screen and you click the play on next to the text, it will use it. It will do all the syncing for you. On the Mainframer script that is more generic, you will have to craft your own commands for that, which, yeah, it could be a tedious task, I think. Yeah. No worries.
At the beginning, you said that you always send all the code to the server. Do you think maybe to send only the changes you have, so you don't need to push everything, because you have a lot of PNGs and? Yeah, well, that's maybe I didn't explain that very well. So the rsync program, what it does, it makes a diff, and all the transfer what changes. So if you already push you're talking about any of the approaches, or? I mean, for example, if you only change one. Yeah. Every time. Push all the code again, it's like. But you mean on my first approach? On my first approach, not even on the first approach. Using rsync, it makes a diff. It makes a delta, right? That's the word. And then you only transfer. It only decides to transfer the files that are not there. That's so. Otherwise, it will take forever and defeat the purpose, right? I don't know. I think. Yeah. Ooh. How much time do you save with the normal approach, more or less? I mean, in your experience. That's the thing. I apologize. I haven't apologized in advance, but I should have. I haven't had any time here, right? You cannot tell. And I was working on a company before, and we were using this. But I cannot talk about build times on that because I'm not there anymore. But I can say I can give rough numbers without like saying a task that was taking maybe on a local machine 5-6 minutes could go down to 2 minutes. But keeping in mind the laptop wasn't that good. Then I remember trying with better laptop, then the difference wasn't that big. But still there was a difference because you always have a machine that is only running this. It's not running any desktop, any Android Studio, any Chrome with 200 tabs open on it. So still you have that benefit. As I said before, then you might have the problem with the network. If the network is not good, then the time that you need to sync back might be, the overall of doing all of that, the whole journey, might be slower than actually doing on a machine. That depends a lot. So giving numbers, I didn't think it would have been fair because it depends a lot on project, network, and many things, right? So I didn't put any numbers. Sorry for that. Any other question? More questions?
And how many servers do you have?
At the moment, where I'm working now is TransferWise. I joined like a month ago. I'm still working on getting one. Still have got one, but people are on board and we'll probably have one to start with. But on a previous company we had two, one for each office, but on like around 10 people on each server kind of thing.
Okay, so if let's say your main build server is down, then if the server is down, then how can you switch to another server automatically?
They are on different physical places. But one way of doing that, in the case you want to do that, I tried actually investigating a little bit on how to do load balancing. I didn't quite get something done properly, but I guess you can do things with SSH tunneling. That's a way that you could do. You can jump into the different machines, and one machine could decide. I've investigated that a little bit, but I never implemented anything quite good. But one of the things that you can do is just have another alias that changes your configuration, which I had actually because I had some machine at home and another machine in the office. So an alias and having two configuration files and like say workspace, home or a workstation or whatever you want to name it. You can have two aliases and they change you have the two configuration files with different name, and then you replace the config file every time you do that. That's something that people can do.
And last question, sorry.
Yeah.
From my perspective, that this is the same as the CI server. So what do you see the difference between CI and the solution? You say it is the same as a CI server? Yeah.
Well, fundamentally it is different. I know that the configuration of the machine is Linux and having all those dependencies, but it's fundamentally different in the terms of how you use it. This is something that you make a change and then compile. You click compile and it compiles. CI you use it for continuous integration. So you want to keep generating stuff whenever you create PRs or nightly to create nightly builds. It is in the use, so it is different in how you use it. But I understand that it's quite similar in terms of configuration on what you have on a remote build. But I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, Enrique, for your talk.
Cheers.